Hello, welcome back to DJX Chronicles. I apologize that I've gone down recording one day a week, but I've got a lot going on. Today, I am going to go on ahead and start a something written by G.K. Chesterton. It's an essay called The Superstition of Divorce. There's a whole book about it, but today I'm only reading the first little part, which is, same as the title. It is futile to talk of reform without reference to form. To take a case from my own taste and fancy, there is nothing I feel to be so beautiful and wonderful as a window. All casements are magic casements, whether they open on the foam or the front garden. They lie close to the ultimate mystery and paradox of limitation and liberty. But if I follow my instinct towards an infinite number of windows, it would end in having no walls. It would also, it may be added incidentally, end up in having no windows either. For a window makes a picture by making a picture frame. But there is a simpler way of stating my more simple and fatal error. It is that I have wanted a window without considering whether I wanted a house. Now, many appeals are being made to us today on behalf of that light and liberty that might well be symbolized by windows, especially as so many of them concern the enlightenment and liberation of the house in the sense of the home. Many quite disinterested people urge many quite reasonable considerations in the case of divorce as a type of domestic liberation. But in the journalistic and general discussion of the matter, there is far too much of the mind that works backwards and at random, in the manner of all windows and no walls. Such people say they want divorce without asking themselves whether they want marriage. Even in order to be divorced, it is generally been found necessary to go through the preliminary formality of being married. And unless the nature of this initial act be considered, we may as well be discussing haircutting for the bald or spectacles for the blind. To be divorced is to be in the liberal or literal sense unmarried. And there is no sense in a thing being undone when we do not know if it is done. There is perhaps no worse advice, 9 times out of 10, than the advice to do the work that's nearest. It is especially bad when it means, as it generally does, removing the obstacle that's nearest. It means that men are not to behave like men, but like mice, who nibble at the thing that's nearest. The man, like the mouse, undermines what he cannot understand, because he himself bumps into a thing, he calls it the nearest obstacle, though the obstacle may happen to be the pillar that holds up the whole roof over his head. He industriously removes the obstacle, and in return, the obstacle removes him and much more valuable things than he. This opportunism is perhaps the most unpractical thing in this highly unpractical world. People talk vaguely against destructive criticism. But what is the matter with this criticism is not that it destroys, but that it does not criticize. It is destruction without design. It is a or taking a complex machine to pieces, bit by bit, in any order, without even knowing what the machine is for. And if a man deals with a deadly dynamic machine on the principle of touching the knob that's nearest, he will find out the defects of that cheery philosophy. Now, leaving many sincere and serious critics of modern marriage on one side for the moment, great masses of modern men and women who write and talk about marriage are thus nibbling blindly at it like an army of mice. When the reformers propose, for instance, that divorce should be obtainable after an absence of 3 years, the absence actually taken for granted in the first military arrangement of the late European war. Their readers are supporters supporters could seldom give any sort of logical reason for the period being 3 years, and not 3 months or 3 minutes. They are like people who should say, "Give me 3 feet of dog," and not care where the cut came. Such persons fail to see a dog as an organic entity. In other words, they cannot make head or tail of it. And the chief thing to say about such reforms or reformers of marriage is that they cannot make head or tail of it. They do not know what it is, or what it is meant to be, or what its supporters suppose it to be. They never look at it, even when they are inside it. They do the work that's nearest, which is poking holes in the bottom of a boat under the impression that they are digging in a garden. This question of what a thing is, and whether it is a garden or a boat, appears to them abstract and academic. They have no notion of how large is the idea they attack, or how relatively small appear the holes they pick in it. Thus, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, an intelligent man in other matters, says that there is only a theological opposition to divorce, and that it is entirely founded on certain texts in the Bible about marriages. That is exactly as if he said that a belief in the brotherhood of men was only founded on certain texts in the Bible about all men being the children of Adam and Eve. Millions of peasants and plain people all over the world assume marriage to be static without having ever clapped eyes on any text. Numbers of more modern people, especially after the recent experiments in America, think divorce is a social disease without having ever bothered about any text. It may be maintained that even in these, or in any one, the idea of marriage is ultimately mystical, and the same may be maintained about the idea of brotherhood. It is obvious that a husband and wife are not visibly one flesh in the sense of being a quadruped, it is equally obvious that Paderewski and Jack Johnson are not twins, and probably have not played together at their mother's knee. There is indeed a very important admission or addition to be realized here. What is true is this, that if the nonsense of Nietzsche or some such sophists submerged current culture, so that it was the fashion to deny the duties of fraternity, then indeed it might be found that the group which still affirmed fraternity was the original group in whose sacred books was the text about Adam and Eve. Suppose some Prussian professor has opportunely discovered that Germans and lesser men are respectively descended from two such very different monkeys, that they are in no sense brothers, but barely cousins, any number of times removed. And suppose he proceeds to remove them even further with a hatchet. Suppose he bases on this a repetition of the conduct of Cain, saying not so much, "Am I my brother's keeper?" as is, "He really my brother?" And suppose this higher philosophy of the hatchet becomes prevalent in colleges and cultivated circles, and even more foolish philosophies, as even more foolish philosophies have done. Then I agree. It probably will be the Christian, the man who preserves the text about Cain, who will continue to assert that he is still the professor's brother, that he is still the professor's keeper. He may possibly add that, in his opinion, the professor seems to require a keeper, and that is doubtless the situation in the controversies about divorce and marriage today. It is the Christian church which continues to hold strong, when the world, for some reason, has weakened on it. What many others hold at other times, but even then, it is barely picking up the shreds and scraps of the subject to talk about a reliance on texts. The vital point in the comparison is this, that human brotherhood means a whole view of life, held in the light of life, and defended, rightly or wrongly, by constant appeals to every aspect of life. The religion that holds it most strongly will hold it when nobody else holds it. That is quite true. And that some of us may be so perverse as to think a point in favor of the religion. But anybody who holds it at all will hold it as a philosophy, not hung on one text, but on 100 truths. Fraternity may be a sentimental metaphor. I may be suffering a delusion when I hail a Montenegrin peasant as my long lost brother. As a fact, I have my own suspicions about which of us it is that has got lost. But my delusion is not a deduction from one text or from 20. It is the expression of a relation that to me at least seems a reality. And what I should say about the idea of a brother, I should say about the idea of a wife. It is supposed to be very unbusinesslike to begin at the beginning. It is called abstract and academic principles, with which we English, etc., etc., it is still, in some strange way, considered unpractical to open up inquiries about anything by asking what it is. I happen to have, however, a fairly complete contempt for that sort of practicality, for I know that it is not even practical. My ideal businessman would not be one who planked down 50 pounds and said, "Here is hard cash." I am a plain man. It is quite indifferent to me whether I am paying a debt, or giving alms to a beggar, or buying a wild bull, or a bathing machine. Despite the infectious heartiness of his tone, I should still, in considering the hard cash, say, like a cabman, "What's this?" I should continue to insist, priggishly, that it was a highly practical point, that the money was what it was supposed to stand for, to aim at, or to declare. What was the nature of the transaction? Or, in short, what the devil was the man supposed he was doing? I shall therefore begin by asking, in an equally mystical manner, what in the name of God and the angels a man getting married supposes he is doing. I shall begin by asking what marriage is. And the mere question will probably reveal that the act itself, good or bad, wise or foolish, is of a certain kind, that it is not an inquiry, or an experiment, or an accident. It may probably dawn on us that it is a promise. It can be more fully defined by saying it is a vow. Many will immediately answer that it is a rash vow. I am content, for the moment, to reply that all vows are rash vows. I am not now defending, but defining vows. I am pointing out that this is a discussion about vows. First, or, or of whether there ought to be vows, and second, of what vows ought to be. Ought a man to break a promise? Ought a man to make a promise? These are philosophical questions, but the philosophical peculiarity of divorce and remarriage, as compared with free love and no marriage, is that a man breaks and makes a promise at the same moment. It is a highly German philosophy, and recalls a way in which the enemy wishes to celebrate his successful destruction of all treaties by signing some more. If I were breaking a promise, I would do it without promises. But I am very far from minimizing the momentous and disputable nature of the vow itself. I shall try to show, in a further article, that this rash and romantic operation is the only furnace from which can come the plain hardware of humanity, the cast iron resistance of citizenship, or the cold steel of common sense. But I am now defying that the furnace is a fire. The vow is a violent and unique thing, though there have been many besides the marriage vow, vows of chivalry, vows of poverty, vows of celibacy, pagan as well as Christian. But modern fashion has rather fallen out of the habit, and men miss the type for the lack of the parallel. The shortest way of putting the problem is to ask whether being free includes being free to bind oneself. For the vow is a tryst with oneself. I may be misunderstood if I say, for brevity, that marriage is an affair of honor. The skeptic will be delighted to assent by saying it is a fight. And so it is, if only with oneself. But the point here is that it necessarily has the touch of the heroic, in which virtue can be translated by virtus. Now, about fighting. In its nature, there is an implied infinity, or at least a potential infinity. I mean that loyalty is in war is loyalty in defeat, or even disgrace. It is due to the flag precisely at the moment when the flag nearly falls. We do already apply this to the flag of the nation, and the question is whether it is wise or unwise to apply it to the flag of the family. Of course, it is true that we should apply it to neither. That misgovernment in the nation or misery in the citizen would make the desertion of the flag an act of reason and not treason. I will only say here that if this were really the limit of national loyalty, some of us would have deserted our nation long ago. All right. I am not saying I agree or disagree, but that is the superstition of divorce, the first part. I'll see you when I decide to come back, hopefully sooner rather than later.